1 in 2 adults still argue and compete with their brothers and sisters. This was a survey done by the National Organization for Women, and 1/3 of respondents in this study say that they've stopped talking to a sibling altogether at some point in their lives, which is a lot of people. So what are the main things that create this type of conflict? Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Show. I'm so happy you are here. So before we get into it, we're going to be talking about beyond sibling rivalry today, because I've gotten a bunch of emails from people saying that they have difficult relationships with their siblings, with sort of lingering resentment, invisible labor. They're exhausted from the role they're expected to play. So if that is you, this episode is for you. And I'm going to be talking all about the dynamics themselves, the things that you can do. Really, we're going to be hitting like the 6 top issues between siblings, and then basically what can you do about it. This is so incredibly common, and it's also incredibly painful. So before we get into it, if you happen to be new to this YouTube channel, please make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell, that little bell thing. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments. You know, I read them all. Normal people watch Netflix, and I read my YouTube comments on the weekends. So much of the time, I spend so much time here. Let's move it on into today's episode. So today we're talking about beyond sibling rivalry. And part of it could sort of, the subtitle could be the designated roles that still run your family. That could be the subtitle. But we're going to be talking about a lot of, what are the top things that siblings, adult siblings, have conflict with and why? Because I want you to be able to see yourself in this process. And then I'm going to be, there'll be a guide that'll go along with this episode. You can go to terricole.com/guide. And I'm giving you some ideas of how you can sort of try to find a balance in your relationship with your siblings. And I mean, for many of us, or many of you, maybe your family always treats you like the responsible one, or maybe you're the broken one, right? Or you're the one who handles everything. So what can we do about it if we feel like we are stuck in these roles? I was reading something in AARP magazine, one of my favorite magazines, by the way. It's so awesome. And I was reading it. My husband is 10 years older than me. So he got it, I think, when he turned 50, and now he's 70. So I've been reading this for long before I was old enough to actually read it. I think it's for people 50 and over. Anyway, it's a wonderful magazine. So I was reading something about it, and they were talking about the statistics that 1 in 2 adults still argue and compete with their brothers and sisters. This was a survey done by the National Organization for Women, and 1/3 of respondents in this study say that they've stopped talking to a sibling altogether at some point in their lives, which is a lot of people. So what are the main things that create this type of conflict? Well, I mean, listen, one that is, and this is all from this article, right? One is wills, right? Estates and wills. So a lot of times buried wounds will find their way up to the surface around grief and loss. And even if you don't think that your family is that way, you really don't know until you have a loss and you're dealing with an estate what it's going to bring in. So it brings up the possibility of a power struggle, because here's the thing. When you have a will, when you have an estate, someone is left the executor of that estate. So in my family of origin, I'm the youngest, but as many of you know, I'm the designated oldest child. So I was left the executor of the health care of my father. And my sister right above me were the 2 youngest sisters. She was the executor of the will. And the older 2 sisters were not. So that already, I think, left some hurt feelings. Or, I mean, listen, I was very grateful that my sister was chosen to be the executor and not me, because it's like a massive responsibility. It was a complicated estate. It had built, things not just here's money in the bank. There were other things, but that did certainly bring up hurt feelings. And there was questions about who was getting what, and if you would have told me before my father passed away that we would ever have been a family that would have given a shit about that or had any conflicts, I would have said absolutely not. So it's really about, when you look at estates, there's a lot being said, like the parent is no longer there if there is an estate. And I know this is a high class problem, right? Because not everyone has anything they can leave to anyone, right? But it still creates complications. Who's left to do what? And then you have the situation that what if one of the siblings cared for the parent more, but then didn't get more, right? And they somehow believe that they're entitled to more, right? These are all the ways that conflicts can happen. Another thing is birth order. So what happens with birth order is like who was born first, second, third. This affects the relationships. And, I've done multiple episodes of this show on family roles. I mean, the last episode, I was sort of talking about that as well. So the firstborn children a lot of times are viewed as, and sometimes they're required to be, the most responsible one, right? A lot of times, the eldest daughter is almost expected. And in many cases, I've heard from many of you, where you really feel like you've raised your siblings, that there was a complete expectation that you would be a built-in babysitter. I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and we were 12 when her youngest brother was born, and how there was just a total expectation that whenever her parents wanted to go out, she would just babysit the kids. They just did whatever they wanted. And that there's a layer of resentment when your own childhood is being like negatively impacted by that, right? Because she was expected to be grown up. And then in a way, the other siblings resented her because she also acted like a boss because she was put in a position to be the boss. So, and then we have the regular typical family order things, right? That we know about. The youngest is spoiled. They're the favorite. They're the baby. The middle is ignored. They're overlooked. They're unheard. There's a lot of those things, and a lot of those things are true. And all of that impacts the way that siblings interact. And there was research done in 2023. This was also in the AARP. The article that I read, that it was in the Journal of Family Relations, found that when parents treated siblings differently, sibling relationships weren't as strong, right? So siblings engaged in less affectionate and more hostile interactions, particularly when parents, particularly fathers, failed to provide equal treatment to their offspring. And I think that there's something really important about understanding that there are reasons why you feel the way you do. In healthy family systems, there's a setup to, you don't pit the children against each other, right? Favoritism is really bad. I mean, listen, there's, mothers play a part in this as well. There was also a study from Cornell University that revealed that 70% of mothers in their 60s and 70s felt closer to one child over another. And here's the thing. Of course, that's probably true. Obviously, that's true. It was a study done by Cornell. It's true. But the question is, do the siblings know who the favorite is? And I'll ask every one of you, in your family system that you grew up in, if you had siblings, would you all be able to agree who was your mother's favorite, who was your father's favorite? If you had a two-family, if you had a two-parent home, you would probably know. And in my family, we do it kind of kidding, but I don't know that we're kidding. You know what I mean? Like, I think we all kind of know it's true. But again, there's all this pressure on whoever is the hero child to perform to be the favorite. So again, that's said from being a hero child, that, it's also not free. And listen, whether the favoritism is real or not, meaning whether it's simply perceived as favoritism or whether it's actually there, this can last your entire life. The resentment that can come from that. So another major conflict is aging parents, right? So everyone has a role with aging parents most of the time, right? Everyone is doing something. Often, the oldest child is expected to do more. Sometimes you've got gender roles in there, where if you have a bunch of brothers and one daughter, that there's, depending on the culture of the family, there's an expectation that the daughter will do more of the caretaking. You also have designated oldest children. So again, you might be the designated eldest daughter, even if you're not the oldest child. Where I was the youngest, But I've talked about this before, you guys, but I was the youngest, but I was the designated oldest child in my family of origin for a long time, until I changed that through therapy and through working on it and family constellation therapy and a bunch of other things. But that happens, and I know it's not just me. Actually, when I was on We Can Do Hard Things, Abby, I knew that she was the youngest, but I had a sense that she was also the designated oldest child, which she confirmed when I was on that show. I was like, did you know? And she was like, oh my God, that is totally me. There was a consensus report in 2020, right? There was a caregiving about about caregiving in the U.S. And it showed that the majority of caregivers for aging parents, 61%, who make medical appointments and otherwise provide care to a parent, are women. So there really is something about gender at play that can also create a lot of resentment if there is an expectation that simply because you are of a particular gender that you should be doing more of the emotional labor, which is true in life in general. It's something that hopefully is changing. But, why are we even talking about emotional labor? Because it's exhausting, and women have been doing the bulk of it for millennia, forever, it seems. There's also jealousy is another thing that comes into play. Something about when you're in a family system, depending on the parents, if there's this sense of scarcity or lack, right? If your parents weren't generous, if the love was quite conditional, it can create this sense of jealousy among siblings. If you had a family system where there was a lot of love given or a lot of affection given or feeling like it was pretty evenly dispersed, like I felt like my father gave it to none of us and my mother gave it to all of us, is how I feel about my own family system, where I think we were equally ignored by my father. And I feel like we were pretty equally loved and adored by my mother. But again, this was my own experience, which of course I can only see it through my own lens. I don't know if my sisters would agree, but that's something for you to think about in your own life. Did you feel that you got less than others? Because those family roles do make a difference, especially if you were the scapegoat. There probably was less attention and affection on you if you were scapegoated in your family system. Another thing to think about is, are you the person who is creating success for the family, right? If you're more successful than other siblings, if there's an uneven amount of success, that can create sibling rivalry as well. And of course, the family system, if you're the golden child in a family system, then there's an expectation that everyone can agree, kind of, or you're the hero child. Everyone can agree that you're great. The family system agrees that you're great. But again, there's a certain amount of pressure and expectation put on you if that is your role. I think, a lot of sibling rivalry can come, or resentment, if the parents are, more focused on the successful kid than anyone else, because it doesn't feel fair. I think that fairness is a big thing with sibling rivalry, and at least the perception of fairness. That's really what we want. And then you have the whole thing of grandchildren, that if it's important to the family system, right, if the grandparents or the grandparents to be, that's very important. The sibling with the children may either be favored by the parents, even though everyone is adults, and having the people who don't have kids feeling less important, right? And again, we have to talk about these things, right? We're going to get into the strategies for coping with this, but also understand that there's a million other scenarios that you might be in your life or have been in. If you had one of your siblings was the identified patient, if you had someone who had addiction issues, if you had someone who had mental health challenges that sucked up a lot of air in the room, if you had someone who was sick, right? I had a friend who had a sibling who eventually passed away, but it was all of her life. And it had to be. So it's not, again, we're not blaming. So it isn't like she didn't love the sibling or care about them, but it's hard having someone else always being the focal point of attention, whether because their life is chaotic, whether it's because they are an addict, whether it's because they have mental health challenges or physical challenges. It still means that you're not really getting your fair share of the attention simply because there's not enough bandwidth to go around. So a lot of times, you guys, when we're talking about sibling rivalry, it's not a blame game thing, right? It really is. There are a million reasons. Your parents could have done the best job that they possibly could with the bandwidth that they had, and you still might not have got enough. I mean, part of the shifts, right? How do we make it better? Well, you have to want to make it better if things are rough between you, right? And I think that there's something really important about being proactive, right? Talk long before you need to figure out what is happening. I did an episode on like death and dying and preparing for those types of things. And we need to be talking about someone's will long before they're in hospice, right? We need to know what are the wishes of the parents, the older people in their lives for themselves. You know, if one of them is going to need nursing home care, right? You have to figure out, how is that going to be paid for? Is there money for that? Do they have long-term insurance? If you're dealing with an estate, you could also choose to hire a neutral third party to not have the whole favoritism thing come into it. It can happen ahead of time. It could be a lawyer. So there's many things that you can do, and there's lots of conversations. And in the guide, I'll give you some ideas of different sort of conversation starters that you can have, because these conversations may not be easy, but they're so important to do proactively, right? We're trying to have the least amount of damage done to our relationships, and we have to be proactive to make that happen. We have to look at ourselves too, right? Are we going on a script from childhood? Are we coming from our best self? Are we coming from our adult self now? Our ability to problem solve, because nothing like your family of origin to bring up, like to trigger sort of childhood feelings, or like make us feel like we're 12 years old again, spending time with the people that we grew up with. So again, we need to look inward. It's also really important that we set healthy boundaries, right? It's not necessarily about ultimatums, but it's about saying what you can and can't do. We have to know what our limits are. And I think that in these unspoken family roles, right, many of us have had these roles assigned early on in our lives. No one has ever even talked about it out loud. It just happens. So golden child, mascot, scapegoat, invisible, the parentified one. Now, these definitely can become our identities, but they have a deep impact on our sibling relationships. So I feel like we have to look in before we go out, just like we do with everything, and really look at what are we identified with? Are we trying to fulfill that hero child role, or are we being the invisible one because we're afraid to assert ourselves with our siblings? So again, so much of it has to do with the work that we have to do. The invisible labor is real, so we have to talk about that. If you are the emotional go-between, if you are the group organizer, if you are the crisis responder, right? Even if this is something that's looked at as natural for you to do, because you do it so well, so to speak, it's absolutely exhausting, and you will no doubt have role fatigue, so to speak, over time. So we don't want it to be super uneven. You don't want one sibling to be doing everything where others will stay at a distance. Sometimes you have siblings that don't live near the aging parents, and that can create resentment because the ones who are close have to come whenever something is going on. So we need boundaries and open communication so that we're not really damaging our relationships with our siblings. And the boundary setting has everything to do with clarity about your capacity, right? Like what can you do? What are you willing to do? What can you do without total self-abandonment, right? You have to do this consciously. If you are going to be a caregiver, and many of us are naturally, but you have to do it consciously with in mind what your limits are. And you can speak your truth. I'll give you some scripts in the guide. Go to terricole.com/guide. Right? I want to be, of course, I'm a part of supporting mom, and I also need to be honest about what I can't do. Here's what I'm available for, and here's what I'm not. And those can be hard conversations. You can also make requests. It's so important, rather than complaints. I need you to take on the financial planning, or we'll need to get outside help, right? If that is too much for you. And you also have to really, really hook into the fact of this truth. You are not responsible for how your boundaries make someone else feel, or how someone else feels about them, right? You are only responsible for setting your healthy boundaries and protecting yourself and your relationships, because that is exactly what you're doing. Listen, your history does not have to be your destiny simply because of the way it was when you were younger, right? You don't have to be basically the unpaid CEO of the family system. You have choices. So I'm curious to know if this episode of the Terri Cole Show added value to your life. I super hope it did. Please make sure that you go check out the guide that I made for you, terricole.com/guide. If you love this, if this is helpful to you, remember, I have a membership that is very reasonable. Go to terricole.com/TCM to join the Terri Cole membership. And we do this Q&A style yakking every single week. We do it 4 times a month, and I would love to see you on the inside. So thank you for being with me. I hope you have the most amazing week. And as always, take care of you.